Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Zero to Empire podcast. On this episode, I have Chris Clinton. He's an executive coach, and he's going to be going over his story and how he got to where he is today. And you don't want to miss out on this. It'll be a very solid episode, and make sure to stay tuned. So, Chris, thanks for being on the podcast. And what actually started you to become an executive coach? Like, take us back to the beginning of where you got to today.
Okay, well, Sam, thanks for having me. So what got me into the executive coaching side is I came up in the manufacturing industry and I spent years there. And then later I became a teacher teaching what I used to do. I was a machinist and I became a teacher. So I loved mentoring and training people. But what I found is we were sending students out to a lot of companies that were ill equipped. So I got an operations management. I started working with some of these leaders and some of these owners, and I really enjoyed helping them sort of transform their companies. But as we'll talk about later, working with owners in that capacity wasn't really the best way to make an impact. So I stepped away from that, and now I coach as more of a third party to these companies to help them sort of bridge gaps between different cultures and things like that.
Yeah, that's cool. And so you spent over 2 decades in the machining industry. How'd that actually shape your leadership lens today?
So coming from the boots on the ground perspective, um, I came up, I didn't know anything about a machine shop when I first walked into one. So I've learned over 25 years everything that needed to know. Now, obviously, 10 years into it, I started training newer people that would come in. So that's where I started learning that I liked mentoring others, teaching them things, helping them gain new skills. And so it's really sort of a natural progression because as I moved out of that and started teaching, it was the same concept. It's just now they were students and we weren't in a machine shop anymore. And then from that to working directly with leaders. So it was all one natural progression, really.
That's solid, and I'm glad to hear it. And so you had before this, we talked about how you had a difficult conversation with the owner. How did that actually teach you about company culture, and how did that actually affect how you go about teaching others today?
So it taught me a lot about the roles. So as I was saying, the capacity of me being there as an operations manager, working with the owner, I like to say that it's sort of like serving two kings. Um, I'm there as his employee under a salary, but I'm also there to make a change for the company in spite or despite what he wants. And it's really hard to balance that. A lot of people want to keep their checks, so they don't want to have the hard discussions. So, as a third party coach now, I don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to fire me for having a frank conversation about the culture in your company because I don't work for your company. You brought me in here to help you fix a problem. So it works out a lot better for me because there's no split loyalties there. I'm not getting a paycheck from them. I'm there to solve a problem for them, and that's it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And who is your ideal client today?
So right now, I still focus on manufacturing, and I own a construction company too. So I really like to focus on manufacturing and construction because I understand those industries. Also, because of my background and where I'm from, I feel like those industries could really use help with that bridging the cultural gap between bringing in more minorities, and it's a different look and it's a different atmosphere than what they're used to. So we work really hard to help them understand the different intrinsic and extrinsic values that today's generation has compared to people like my age. So I like to help those companies because I think manufacturing companies, especially machinists, and where I come from, and then construction companies, they have great opportunities from people who may be from, not the best neighborhoods, not the best areas, to really just pull themselves up out of that. So I like to work with those companies as much as I can.
Yeah, that's good that you have that personal insight and that you are actually running your own business so that you can actually relate to them and help them get through their life together.
Yeah.
And can you actually tell us a breakthrough moment with one of your clients that has made an impact on you thus so far?
So one of the clients, I found myself sort of tunnel vision when I'm working with somebody with their business or this was an employee of a company, so he was one of the main engineers, head engineers. Usually it's about how can I perform better for the company or do more for the company. And what we found out through the programs was for this guy, really where he was at work wise was solid. He had so much noise going on outside of work that he needed to focus on that. So when he came to me, we were discussing him possibly moving to a bigger role and taking more on. But what we found out is that it was better for him to stay in this role where he didn't have a lot of challenge. So he had reserve energy for when he got home because he had stuff in his home life that he really needed to spend some time on. So where he came to me thinking he was going to be looking for a different job or a bigger role, we came to realize that this smaller role that didn't suck up all of his energy was best for him right now. So he could use that energy over here in this other part of his life. So it was sort of like I said, it was insightful because usually I'm thinking, climbing the corporate ladder, what can we do to do more here, make more money, do better? But really, he was fine on that side. His work needed to be done over here. He had some grandchildren living at home, and he came home spent. Um, and we just decided it was better for him to stay where he was, where it was comfortable, so he can come home with more energy and work with the kids.
Yeah, that's awesome that you're able to give him more family time. It's definitely very important to life. And what would you say is your coaching style or structure with most of your clients?
So we're different than most of the coaches I've dealt with. A lot of coaching it comes off like therapy, where the coach asks a lot of questions and you give a lot of feedback, and there's a lot of talking coming from the client side. We're sort of the opposite. So we're looking for nonverbal signals. Everything we do is through Zoom because we need this focused space. I need you to be in a box. And we do about 80% of the talking. And when we're doing that talking, we're really trying to initiate different nonverbal cues from you. Like I call it a gag reflex. I look for a gag reflex. So if I'm working with somebody that I know is very geared towards, equality and justice, I'll have discussions about people or experiences that are the opposite of that. And I'm looking for them to be like, oh, I can't stand those guys. Because that just sort of confirms for me that there's some lived experience there that we could touch on to find out, you know, why that's an issue in his life, what kind of people he's dealt with and how he's dealt with it and how we could deal with it better. Because, we do the two systems, so instinctual and adaptive. So it helps me understand where they're coming from, where their instinct is. That gag reflex is going to be instinctual. And then I can say, well, you're going to have to work with these type of people. So how do we go adaptive? How we know this is a trigger for you. You're going to have to work with that environment or those people. So how do you, when that happens, decide to go adaptive and work with those people? Because if your gag reflex shows up, there's going to be offense. You're going to upset people. We have to figure out how to go adaptive in that situation. So we work differently. Like I said, we do most of the talking, and we're always looking for nonverbal cues when we do that.
Yeah, I like that approach. It's very unique. And before this, we actually talked about the My Success program that you offer. What does that actually look like, and how does it help your clients?
So my success is a three-part program. We have my leadership, my culture, and my life. And what we say those about is my leadership is about naming choices. So what we found is most leaders, when there's a goal, right? So there's either an opportunity or an obstacle that comes in front of them. So they create a goal. Okay. So every time, and there's other things that happen, but we find that these five things happen every time, right? So we create a goal, and as soon as we create a goal for something, we start to look for the resources. How are we going to accomplish this goal? Then we make a decision or take action. And when we take action, we create stress. So in my leadership, we go through those things to figure out, what are your biases? What are you biased towards, and how do they impact the way you make decisions for this goal? What happens whenever you take action? Because every time we take action, there's stress. So it's not so much about the stress the leader feels, But when they're under stress, how do they make the team around them feel? And how do we sort of mitigate that so it doesn't cause a lot of problems? So I'm a push person. I push hard. So when I'm under stress, people feel around me, they feel like they're not getting enough done. And I've never said that to them, but they feel that from me because of the way I approach goals. And I have to be aware of that and make sure they know that my my energy has nothing to do with what their performance is in this. So then we have my culture. My culture is about negotiating conflict because we're going to have conflicts. I talked earlier about extrinsic and intrinsic people. So, especially with this new generation gap, we have some people who are very much performance based. You know, they like to be reviewed, they like to know how they're doing. If you tell them everything's great and they're doing a great job and there's nothing, they'll be mad because they want to know where they can improve. That's my generation, you know, slightly younger than me. This newer generation wants to feel valued for their presence because they're there. They're very intrinsic. We raised a generation where we worked all the time. I'm 50 years old. So the generation I raised, we worked all the time. My sons are more for work-life balance because of that. They're very intrinsic, I'm very extrinsic. How do we bridge that divide? How do extrinsic people learn to understand, appreciate, and respect intrinsic people? Or vice versa? How do intrinsic people learn to take feedback from extrinsic people that may come off sort of offensive to them because they don't want to be graded? So that's what my culture works through. And then my life is all about, you know, what's your identity? What's the legacy you want to leave behind? What are your aspirations? And we work through those things because they really fuel how we show up in all the different areas of our life. So that's the three programs: my leadership, my culture, my life. So,
Yeah, those are really three solid programs. And when it comes to telling your story, we talked about how you actually kind of struggle with telling it. Why is that?
so, you know, a lot of the people I talk to are, you know, college degrees, lots of stuff on the walls, very successful from a different walk of life than I came from. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I'm from a pretty rough part of St. Louis, Missouri. I had a sordid background as a teenager. Well, I went to prison for an offense that I didn't do it, but my car was involved, my friends were involved, and that was the circle I ran around in. So I was facing 18 years whenever I went to prison at 17 years old. Um, that's part of my story. But some people hear that, they're like, prison at 17 years old, you know, his dad shot him whenever he was 13 years old. You know, all these things in my life, a lot of people hear that and it comes off. And for a long time, I didn't tell that side of my story. As they got to know me, they would know that I wasn't from their Ivy League, you know, areas. But I found that because I'm a pretty authentic, transparent person, that, you know, I guess I just approach everything in life like I did from those early years. Like I pushed through struggle and I try to figure out how to come out on top. And so I bring that into my coaching and I help people do that. So I hid that. I didn't hide that side of me, but I didn't really openly talk about it. Now it's all over the place. I'll tell people anytime they ask, you know, yeah, I was in a really rough neighborhood. I had really rough friends, almost went to prison for 18 years. I only did 12 months. Actually, that's where I learned about machining. Like I would have never become a machinist had I not gone to jail. And if I didn't become a machinist, I'd have never become a college instructor for a machine shop. None of the things I've done would have happened without that thing that happened back then. So,
Wow, that's unfortunate you had to go through all that. It definitely did impact you, and I'm glad you're making an impact on
yeah.
other people. And it actually, you're making even a bigger impact that you have a massive goal with, and you actually are trying to impact over 1 million people through the cultural transformation. How do you stay connected for that vision, and what does that look like?
So, while I have it on the wall, for one, so I see it every day. I journal every day, and I'm always thinking, you know, where can I make an impact today? Or how have I been impacted today? Because sometimes I find whenever I get to the end of my day and certain things happen to me that have left sort of an impression, whatever that thing was, it reached me somehow. And if I could use that same method to reach somebody else, then I'm going to put that into my little bag of tricks to try to impact more people. My goal with the cultural change is, like I said, there's great opportunity in manufacturing and in construction and a lot of areas for people from at-risk areas, diverse groups to really do well for themselves. A lot of companies are doing better at bringing that into their companies. Some companies still need work. So I spend a lot of time in that area trying to help, because what I found at the school I was teaching at is we would try to push, getting a more diverse workforce and getting them all ready. The retention of those students inside of the industries we sent them to is so low that I felt like I could keep teaching students and pushing them out there to fail, or I can go out there and try to work with those companies so when the students come, they don't fail. So that's why I transitioned over. Rather than working with diverse students to send them to the workforce, I'm trying to work with the workforce to have open doors for diverse students. So,
I see, that's solid. I'm glad you're doing that for them. And what would you say is actually what most business owners get wrong about culture?
so I think it's funny. A lot of people, whenever you talk about culture, a lot of old school business owners, especially in manufacturing and construction, they automatically think it's that touchy feely, have the party and the gold star of the day and do all, like, the Gemba walks and the daily walk ups and the conversations in those meetings are great. But I think for somebody like me, when I talk to a business owner, I know what they want because I own businesses. So at the end of the day, my bottom line, my profitability, those are the things that matter. When I put on my hat as business owner here at my company, I'm a culturally aware person. I have empathy. I lead with compassion. However, my job in this seat is to make sure there's enough money coming through the door to pay the guys, to keep everybody eating, their families fed, everything. That's my job. So when I present to owners and we talk about how much culture can change turnover, so like in the manufacturing industry, I think the last time the Deloitte, I think the last Deloitte white paper I read on manufacturing turnover is like 29.7%. So let's say 25%. All right. Average company, 40 employees. So 25%, 40 employees, we talk about 10 employees a year annually turning over. The cost of turnover is half to 200% salary. Average salary is about 50,000 in manufacturing. So 25,000 to 200,000 per, or 25,000 to 100,000 per employee turned over. If we come in and work on your culture, let's say out of those 10 employees, 5 or 6 of them left due to a cultural issue. They weren't treated right, whatever the situation was. There was discrimination, bullying, whatever it was. Um, so 6 of those people left. If we cut that in half, if you improved by 3 employees by increasing awareness of culture in your company, you would be saving 75 to $300,000 a year by making that one change. Also, whenever culture is the component that changes turnover, when those two work together, almost always in manufacturing, production can go up by 20 to 25%. So now I've reduced the amount of people leaving your company, saving you $200,000-300,000, and I've increased the production in your company by 20% by culture. That's the conversation business owners need to hear. They don't need to hear how people are going to get along better and there's going to be kumbaya. They aren't there for that. They are there to make sure people are paid and fed and taken care of. That's their job. So you have to talk to them about the money impact, or else they're not gonna have a culture conversation.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and that's some great insight. And where can those interested in your coaching find and reach out to you by?
So we have a website, bespoke, BESPOKE compass, like the compass.com, or on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn, Christopher Clinton, or look up Bespoke Compass on LinkedIn, and you'll find me and my partner Robert on there, a few other people.
That's solid, Chris. Thanks for being on the podcast, and make sure everyone to go check him out if you'd like to get him as your coach. And I'll see everyone in the next episode of Zero to Empire.